Welcome to the Conduit Deeper podcast, a podcast that takes a deep dive into the details that surround our current sermon series, from current events to fascinating finds to conversations that take us deeper into the Word. Thanks for joining us.
Welcome to our Deeper podcast. My name is Mo, executive pastor at Conduit Church, joined with our lead pastor, Darren Tyler, for what is Independence Week.
Should we not have taken this day off? Did we?
Independence Day.
Did we
tomorrow.
mess this up? It's Independence Eve.
So it's Independence Day Eve.
Yeah, so Santa's getting his sleigh full of bottle rockets and Roman candles.
That is true. I as one of his little elves, I did swing by the fireworks tent yesterday.
Did you really?
Grabbed a few things. And then, I love blowing stuff up. But then I'm like buying these things, and then, I don't know, I just had instant regret.
Because you're burning your money away?
Yeah, because I was watching the clips. You know how they have the little QR code, scan the clip to see what kind of fireworks you're buying, what they do. And realizing the clips were only 30 seconds long. Wait a minute. I just dropped $30 on a box.
Yeah.
It's 30 seconds long.
For a Roman candle, right?
It's oh, man. But I still love doing it. And
did Ohio kids, did you guys do fireworks wars?
No.
No?
Fireworks are illegal in the state of Ohio. Which was one of the benefits when we moved to Tennessee. It blew our minds. We were just
illegal.
Yeah, there's no fireworks in Ohio.
Dude.
Not residential or whatever. You have your fireworks shows, displays, of course, but you can't. There's nowhere to buy them.
So I should not have been as surprised as I was by the response to COVID in Ohio. I didn't realize that there'd been a tyranny for years. I didn't know, a decades-long tyranny. So we could buy them. We would literally spend June mowing lawns. Well, I guess we weren't really raking leaves, selling worms for fish bait, whatever, all with one goal, which was to buy fireworks because we could buy them. And what we would do is then we would buy them off of truckers because the good ones, like the M80s, cherry bombs, those were illegal. But truckers, long haulers would come through Tennessee.
Yeah, and pick them up, and then they'd resell them to white trash kids like me. And, not a bad business model,
right?
Actually,
I still have 2 scars on my chest from getting hit with a Roman candle because we had fireworks wars,
Roman candles, bottle rockets.
Oh, 100%.
Firecrackers, throwing them at each other, black cats.
Oh, yeah. And without any regard for our future eyesight it didn't even occur to us that someone could hit me right square in the eye with a Roman candle. I will say, if it hits your shirt, your chest.
Singed.
Yeah, because it burns the shirt and your skin, and it sort of melts it all into one little amalgamation of pussy fluid, and it leaves a mark. And then you got to, the problem, how am I going to tell my mom this because I got a burnt hole in my shirt?
One quick fireworks story and we'll move on, but you may remember this. It was one of literally the first or second summers we moved to Nashville. We had a little 4th of July party at our house, of which you were there, and so were our good friends, the Juilliards, who lived next door, and a bunch of Conduit friends.
I have a vague memory.
And because we didn't have fireworks in Ohio, I didn't know how to do them. I knew you went and bought this box, right? So it was like a little cube or a rectangle box. I didn't know how to light it. So I started unwrapping it. I unwrapped the box. And I eventually found the wick. I'm like, oh, there's a wick. Okay, great.
It's called a fuse.
A fuse. I was confused.
I was just going to say it's in Ohio.
Because I unwrapped the box, found the fuse, lit it, and we then experienced, I'm sure you remember this, we experienced what felt like 30 seconds in Fallujah when we're all diving for cover because I had taken the package apart. Those things were not shooting up. They were shooting out everywhere. And all 30 of us at this party were literally diving under our chairs and under the deck and around the house on the ground taking cover. It looked like a war scene.
Totally forgotten that. You're right. It was like a dollar store Fallujah. It was like a starter kit Fallujah.
Oh, it was so embarrassing. And then finally, a kind neighbor came over and is like, hey, this is how you should do this.
Yeah, let me mentor you a little bit on your fireworks.
I had never known. I would never been shown.
Well, speaking of fireworks, now we're going to talk a little bit about Genesis. We're going to talk about naked Noah and all that. But I don't want to wait. This debate thing that happened, I guess that wasn't really fireworks. That was more like little snappers or those little snakes you light. You just kind of, you're like, wait, when's this going to go off? And that was so weird.
Well, during the debate, I even had the thought, like, man, we should have wonder if we should have been like live podcasting and just had some commentary during that thing, just because it was so.
Well, that what you would have seen if I were live was I was like I was watching a scary movie
on the edge of your seat.
I kept having to get up and walk away. I'm like, oh my gosh, what the heck is happening? Like, I was with a group of friends, and I literally at one point get up, walk over, sit at a stool behind, just like I couldn't watch. It was, like we all knew that our president was struggling.
I don't think you can say we all knew.
It depends on who we is in that equation.
Correct.
And those that didn't are either willfully ignorant or lying. And by the way, it doesn't matter what your motivation is. It still disqualifies you from being in charge of anything if you say, I didn't notice that. Yeah. But it was worse than I had thought. And there was a moment like I wasn't laughing anymore. I'm like, okay, this guy right now is in charge of our entire nation. And, he should be home eating, Jell-O and
ice cream. That's his favorite.
Ice cream. There you go. And that sounds like it's dismissive, and I guess it is. But this is a problem. Yeah. What was vexing for me on so many levels, but one was I can remember the years while Trump was in office, the amount of hand-wringing from the Rachel Maddows of the world that this guy has access to the nuclear codes, to the point where there were congressional leaders talking about passing laws just to protect us from this quote-unquote unhinged, whatever they thought, and not a mention of it now, that a guy who is clearly and sadly in a state of cognitive decline. Like, I don't know the answer to the question is, or the question I don't have an answer for is, if you're having a quote unquote senior moment, a dementia moment, and you go in and order a guy to fire a missile, do they have to listen to the president? Is that an order?
It's such a good question.
Like, is there somebody behind him?
Technically.
My grandmother suffered for years with Alzheimer's. It was a 15-year journey, which is extremely longer than normal. And I don't know that he has Alzheimer's. There's a story in the Free Press this morning that a neuro specialist, his diagnosis of him, which is dementia. But there were moments where she would go from lucidity to rage to on her hands and knees because the FBI was after her and she was trying to hide from him.
Oh, wow. Like paranoia.
Yeah. And that, so if you've been around dementia at all, for the most part, that's one of the things that especially in the more advanced stages, there's a paranoia to it, and there's just a rage and an anger and language, and it's hard. It's a horrible disease. But our president, whether it's dementia or Alzheimer's or the other thing it's making, and it continues to make me angry, whether it's the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, they continue to make it about age. And it's not about age. It's about mental cognitive abilities. Because there are, Don Finto, right, 93, 94, and like Toby Keith, he may not be as good as he once was, but he's as good once as he ever was. Like he can have a conversation about the Bible at 93 years old. Mm-hmm. I know plenty of people in that age bracket that are, Phyllis Weil, well into her 90s, was driving and went to Israel with us. And so it's not that, but it's about age. And I believe the reason they make it about age, from the left especially, is then they can then turn that around on Trump at the same time, because it's about his. And they keep bootstrapping every little dig they take at Biden right now, because obviously the Democratic Party has lost the unity they had. But they then tag it to whether it's Chuck Schumer or whoever, and you saw it was with Trump too, and Rachel Maddow, the same thing. Well, Trump's cognitive abilities, like we all saw what we saw.
Yeah, you can't hide from that.
Yeah, and so as far as prayer, if you've not been praying for our country, we need to be praying for our country, praying for our leadership. The Bible commands it anyway. But this is I've never seen anything like this.
New York Times mentioned this morning, it's the first time that Biden has mentioned that he is considering seriously whether or not he is going to run now.
So that must have just come out
This morning.
like on their
Like an hour ago.
yeah, because I was saying the 6 a.m.
hour from this recording on Wednesday the 3rd at 10 a.m. Central.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's making the rounds on online right now that he has told a close ally that he is weighing whether or not to continue the race.
There's no way he couldn't consider that. When you see, I mean, we all watched the post debate talking heads, and this like little slack-jawed, gobsmacked looks on the faces of CNN pundits, and even Jake Tapper is going after him now. I mean, and Tapper was in the room with him, so he doesn't share the same unity that he had behind him before. But for like New York Times, like and I guess they did. It's been a week, almost
Tomorrow.
that they have to close ranks as best they can, at least immediately while they're making a decision. So I don't necessarily fault him for not him resigning like the next morning, because they need to have some meetings, and while you're having those meetings, someone's got to say something to the camera, and so holding ranks with it. But it leaves him in a little bit of a pickle, because the question is, if he's not fit to be a candidate, then that means he's not fit to be president. So to admit that is a problem.
Very fluid situation, moving very quickly. Best that I can tell, just based on just reading a lot about this, that Jill and Hunter are steering the ship and pushing him to continue. They are making the decisions currently. Hunter has stepped into all of their official meetings, all the president's official meetings. Joe has allowed Hunter to be in those meetings and help be his mouthpiece. That was reported, I think, 2 days ago, that he's in all official meetings currently, which is upsetting so many people in the White House.
It's staggering. To even just the optics of it alone.
Correct. Yeah, optics alone.
Or like, wait, what? The guy with the hookers and the blow, like that guy, but
yes,
yeah, I'm intrigued, because it's like we're watching history unfold, because it's uncharted waters right now.
Yeah, would this be the first time the 25th Amendment would be invoked if they choose to go that route and replace him due to health concerns?
Yeah, it would be, and the reason it would be is because it's a toothless amendment. And what I mean is, for someone has to speak first, so to as far as that goes. And if you're whatever the Democrat Party, if they're going to go with it, then you're going against your president. Like it's never been invoked, because the risk is too high for the selfishness of the leaders who don't want to be the first one to get out there. And then if it doesn't,
But if so,
but it would be the first.
Then Kamala Harris would, by default, by the way the system is
100%
in place, she would, the vice president would then become the president.
Yeah, which leaves them in yet another pickle, because of the party of affirmative action. The qualification for her for being vice president was that she is black and a female. That's kind of it. Like she, if you remember right, even during the election, she was getting just wrung over the coals because of her prosecutorial. Like she was a pretty hardcore prosecutor in California. Like
San Francisco?
Yeah. And so it was, I believe it was San Francisco.
I'm not sure.
But, long-term prison sentences. And so she was, from the hardcore, like Cortezes of the world, they didn't like her. But if they put Gavin Newsom in, I would be shocked, because a white male from California it ticks none of the boxes, has nothing to do with his qualifications. Now, obviously, I would say he's not qualified because just California, but that's not why they would say that. They would say it's because he's a white male. So it leaves them in a predicament. Like, who do you choose and when do you choose him? And they've cornered themselves into Kamala and
Oakland.
It was Oakland. Oh, God, it's even worse than San Francisco.
Across the
worse
bay.
than San Francisco.
Have you heard her phrase that she repeats everywhere, every speech that she has?
Which one is this?
What can be unburdened by what has been. Have you heard this phrase?
What the heck does that even mean?
She uses it in every speech as like her closer.
I can't. Here's the thing. I can't
What
listen to her.
can be.
I can't listen to her voice.
Unburdened by what has been. She's bringing hope.
Is that what that is? Hope? Because her laugh alone is like, no, in fairness, Tucker Carlson's laugh grosses me out too. But
it makes me laugh when he laughs.
I'm just like, ugh. But I can't listen to her voice. And I know it's a very shallow reason, but I have been burdened for prayer, and it was a good timing for Bill Lee,
Yes.
our governor, to declare a month of prayer and fasting for our state, for our nation. Because I walked away from that. My Apple Watch betrayed me. I only slept like 3 hours after that debate because I was just
Yeah, your mind's racing.
Adrenaline.
Like, what is happening?
Yeah.
What is happening in our country? What could happen next? We have 5 months until an election. The country is completely unsettled at the top level. Both not only in our country but internationally. It has a ripple effect across the globe.
Oh,
And we have no one leading America.
yeah. Yeah, Xi Jinping, their official statement from China was the debate was, quote, entertaining.
Not lying.
He's not lying, but that is not what you're looking for.
That's not what you want.
Not looking for that in a president to be entertaining.
There's all kinds of things that are entertaining on TV. I don't want my presidential debate to be entertaining.
Yeah.
I did laugh out loud, like doubled over when they both got so heated over each other's golf game.
I literally thought he was good. That Trump was going to fall over. Like he did I don't know who he's listening to, but he did a really good job of not talking over or whatever. But when he got to the golf score, he was just visceral, visceral with it. And the guys I was sitting with, watching the debate, a bunch of them are golfers, and they were just howling at it because,
Oh man, I lost it.
yeah.
It was so good. It was so classic. It's like this feels like an SNL skit happening right before our eyes. There's been a Saturday Night Live between the debate and now. Actually, I need to go back and watch to see if they actually redid it.
So they did not do the debate, but what they did do was like a spoof on a horror movie, commercial for a horror movie. And the basic spoof was, we're going to get a new president and each candidate, and it was like, they'd scream at, oh no, not him again or not her again or not, So, but yes, it's the Saturday Night Live social commentary within 48 hours was already talking about him replacing him. I hope that they keep him because it would be an across-the-board win for conservative political candidates literally across the nation. The CNN poll this morning, and maybe this is why Biden is beginning to float it out there. If that leaked, that was an intentional leak, most likely. I think the CNN poll put Trump ahead by 6 points. There's a margin of error one where I don't necessarily trust polls or that, but like if you're coming from a CNN side and it's like 6 points ahead, and then when you boil it down into the swing states, Trump is ahead in New Mexico even. Like there's places that they wouldn't have even thought could have been up for grabs that he is either tied with Biden or is ahead of Biden. And you guys know me. Like I'm not a fan of Trump. I wish that he wasn't so Trump. But when you look at the choices in front of us right now, the political policies this is uncharted. I mean, for sure it's uncharted. The closest that I think I've mentioned it before was Lyndon Johnson in, I think it was 68 or 70. I can't remember which the election year was. When he got all the way to, and he's the guy that replaced Kennedy. But when he got to the convention, that famous, I will not seek or accept the nomination of my party. So he, as a sitting president, did not seek re-election. So I have said multiple times that I genuinely thought that's what Biden was going to do willingly. Now, what I had not factored into that because I've been a political junkie for decades, and as I've thought back on it, I'm like, oh no, this guy has always been a savage, relentless, power. Like this is what he's done. He's been a professional politician. So I was like, oh, never mind. He's not going to do this willingly. And then you combine it with, if he really does lack mental acuity, the very thing you need to make the decision about yourself is mental acuity. So the irony is he can't make that decision with or without it. So he's going to, it's, we talked about it a couple of days ago, but it's like, when you got to take the keys away from grandpa because he's not supposed to be driving. And anybody that's
not safe.
And anyone that's had that conversation with a grandparent or a great grandparent knows they are hostile. And that's just for their car keys. This is like the keys to the White House. Imagine trying to talk somebody out of that without the mental acuity they need to make the mental acute decision. So
there's been a phrase that's been used online to describe what's happening, and that is the emperor has no clothes. And which when we started out this conversation, 20 minutes ago, you'd mentioned, everyone knows, we all can see that he's not, ready. It's not necessarily true, right? It's like there's a half of the country that hasn't been willing to see that the emperor has no clothes, which is interesting. I was curious on the origin of that phrase, the emperor has no clothes, because it ties into your Genesis.
I was going to say,
9.
I thought you were about to segue into naked Noah, the emperor with a naked emperor.
Exactly what I'm doing. Ties into your Genesis 9.
This might be the best segue ever in the history of the Deeper podcast. I'm going to go on record as saying this is subjective, but that's pretty impressive.
It's a story from 1837. The Emperor's New Clothes. It was a story written by Hans Andersen in 1837. It was just talking about how it was writing a story about a king who was misleading the people, and how he had hired people to be around him to craft these fancy new clothes so he would look more powerful, and then those that were the sewing and putting these clothes together convinced him that they were, if he would wear them, it would be invisible, and so he has these invisible clothes on and goes out on a parade and waving to everyone in the crowds, and a child speaks up and says, "The emperor has no clothes," and there was shame. Right? He was finally revealed for who he really was, and
hope it wasn't cold.
Right, and it reminded me, one, of the situation that we're in our country with our current president. It also reminded me of what we just discussed on Sunday with naked Noah being naked and shamed with his family. And so, yes, it's a segue, but it all ties together.
Well, it ties together because part of what comes from shame is obviously physical exposure, like I've been exposed, but even like metaphorically exposed. Like that's all of us. Like that's our greatest fear, is to be exposed for who we really are. And you're right, we did witness that. And that's why I genuinely have empathy right now for Biden and even for Jill. And I've never been a fan of either of them. One of my favorite things ever was when when a president becomes president, they always release their financials, and so you see how generous they are or not. And I remember Obama, like that year when he was elected, I think he gave $1,000 to charity or whatever, but he at least adapted and gave a bunch more money, but not Biden. Biden has always, his financials have always exposed him as being a stingy, cheap, not generous. And of course, he's that way because he views the government as the answer. So I've already, quote unquote, donated to my church, which was the government. But so I've never liked necessarily his persona or but I felt sad for him because that's it. He was exposed in front of an entire world of something that has been so carefully orchestrated to hide, a covering, so to speak, for him, a cover-up of him, which, by the way, the Wall Street Journal, I think it was yesterday, was actually talking about that specifically, how even the White House staff has no access to him. Yeah. So if you're making the poached eggs or whatever, like historically Bush or whoever, they always, Obama, but not with Biden. So that, they're definitely covering it up. But now with cameras everywhere, he was exposed to the entire world. And that is the idea that we saw in Genesis 9, is that here is Noah exposed to, not just to his family, but now he's exposed to the entire world throughout history. Probably more than Biden when you think about it. Like naked Noah has been read by a whole lot more people than Biden.
Yeah, it's interesting, the other side of the story with Noah, right? Like Noah was this incredible, obedient, righteous man who did what the Lord told him to do, saved his family and generations to come. Again, obedient for 120 years, building a ship that he didn't know exactly what it would be for. All of these things, like he's revered in that way, obviously. But then there's the shadow side.
Yeah,
right.
Which we all have. And that's why, man, Genesis 1 through 11, Genesis in general, the Bible as a whole, has the best explanation for humanity, because there are those, especially if you're progressive or liberal, you then decided that there are good people and there are bad people. And of course, you get to decide who are the good ones and the bad ones. And if we can just get rid of the bad ones, then we're going to be okay. Thousands of years of human history have proven that to be demonstrably false. And here it is. The world has started over. God didn't just take the best 1%. It was like the best 0.0000 whatever, 1%. Like that. This is Noah, the best of the best of the best of the best. And he still had a sin nature, just like I do, just like anybody listening to this does. The sin went with him into the ark, and the sin came with him out of the ark. And here we are, within, we don't know exactly how long after. It had to be a few years, only because if you plant a vineyard, anybody knows anything about a vineyard, it takes 5 to 6 years, I think, somewhere in that range for it to start really producing grapes that are wine worthy. So this is at least years, not months after the ark, that you find him hammered alone, naked, covered up in a tent.
We've talked about this before, but shame, there's in the book Voice of the Heart by author Chip Dodd, which we've referenced many times, such a great book, so helpful in understanding our feelings and the things that make us who we are and maybe why we respond the way we do or make the decisions that we do, perhaps. But one of those feelings is shame that we feel. And there's an impairment and a gift to shame. And healthy shame, there is something called healthy shame, and that just acknowledges our need for a Savior. A healthy shame, it brings humility, understanding who we are without Him.
Yeah, it's the acknowledgement that it's funny that a healthy shame would acknowledge the truth about me, which is that, of course, Brene Brown would say, this is toxic shame, that I am, it's not that I did something wrong, is that I am something wrong. But the gospel, which is why it's so beautiful, is that the gospel says, yeah, you are. That's true. But you are so loved that God came to save you from it. So it's like, that's why you can go to either side. And here you got like the top 1%, right? 1.001% still blowing it. Still. And the connection to shame, I think I made the connection on Sunday, but yeah, I know I did, is biblically, especially in the Old Testament, like nakedness and shame are intertwined. It's used over and over again. It's Adam and Eve, naked and ashamed. Genesis 3, they naked and ashamed, but they were unashamed, chapter 2. And multiple instances of that throughout the major and the minor prophets as well. So there is a connection to that with Noah and the shame itself, which is what made, I think, why this got included in, I've been thinking about this a lot while we're leading up to it, because you know how this is, we cover a book, whatever, there's going to be that one passage or verse, I'm either looking forward to this or not looking forward to this, because I've read this over and over again, and it really was this week that it hit me for the first time, this is probably why it was in there, because it does tell us something about our shame and tells us something about what we need for it. And that Russ Taff video interview came out, and it was like, he kept saying, I was clothed in shame, I was covered in shame, and that's the connection to Genesis 3. They put fig leaves on with it. We try to cover it. We try to cover it, with our performance. We try to cover it with work, with alcohol, with numbing, which is what we see with Noah here, is numbing, the shame, because he's a human. That means he's been weaponized shame against him, just like it is with us.
Yeah, I want to talk about that video for a little bit. I went back and watched it, the whole video, the Russ Taff interview on YouTube. It's the Soft White Underbelly channel, which is so interesting. I've been following that guy for years.
Yeah. I watched like clips from it. I've never actually watched an interview front to back, but he definitely gets some amazing confessions and content from people.
Very interesting.
I don't understand the soft white underbelly name. Do you know what that is?
I've not researched to
It's
figure that out.
it's just a weird name for it. But anyway,
It is true.
what it is. But yeah, Russ is. Donna Van Leer sent that to me like on Monday.
I was so surprised that he connected with Russ. Like, it's just kind of
I want to know the story,
like
right?
what brought them together to even have an interview, because Russ's story, while powerful, is not necessarily the type of stories that he covers. He usually covers some wild personal stories. But maybe there's a relationship there somewhere, and he wanted Russ to tell his story. And it's sad. It's a sad story.
So he released a documentary maybe 5-6 years ago.
Yeah.
I saw it on Amazon, and it told the story that I kind of knew, but didn't, and even that it was just good. It was so deep and meaningful, and just it was him and Tori together, but for some reason the way he just laid it out there for an hour,
raw and honest. For those that may not know, I mean, Russ Taff was a leading icon in the Christian music industry for a lot of years.
Yeah.
Powerful voice.
Yeah.
Lead singer of the Imperials in his early 20s.
Yeah.
Went on to have a solo career that was very successful. Then joined the Gaithers. Was part of the Gaithers for, I don't know, a decade at least, maybe more.
Yeah.
He probably still does events with them. Grammy winning, Dove Award winning, all the things.
Yeah.
Here in our town, especially in Nashville, well known, very well known, but secretly was living a completely different life.
Yeah.
Than we all saw on stage,
and was obviously well aware of it. And he talked in this interview about his childhood. He was in California. Daddy was a Pentecostal preacher, and I say, when we say Pentecostal, that they cover such a broad swath, but there actually is a very specific denomination that's a Pentecostal denomination. And I think that's the one that he was talking about, because that was we don't wear makeup, there's no windows in the building, hardcore.
No modern technology.
Pentecostal, yeah. This would be like if you ever saw Steve Martin's movie, I think it was Steve Martin that was an evangelist or whatever. I think it's from that kind of genre. But you're talking about churches of 20 people, but it was his whole life. And his dad was a raging alcoholic, violent man. And so he would see him preaching in front of 20 people on a Sunday, and then come home and be, he'd hide with his brothers and from his dad, and a childhood that many people can relate to. But the part that made it obviously specifically shameful was his dad was a preacher, and drove him to, you're not good enough. I think one of the quotes was, you're not even worth the bullet to shoot you with. Like that was just the language he heard over and over and over again. And he talks about his mom and how she confided in him. I think he referred to it as emotional incest, which was a powerful phrase. And meanwhile, here he comes, he happens to be able to sing one of the best gospel vocals in general. I mean, I don't know if he's still got it in him. Probably he still does, but man, I discovered him in 84, 3-5, I don't remember. He had a record called Medals.
Did you ever work with him or his team?
No, I never even got to meet him. I sat next to him on a plane once, but I was just too, they say never meet your heroes. And I did meet a couple of them, and I was like, okay, I don't want to do that anymore. And in fairness, I met a bunch of them later in life now, and like Michael W. and whatever, and they're just upstanding humans, so that's not a truism. But in those days, I just thought, I don't want to meet Russ. I don't want to know if he's a jerk.
Right.
But I do know this. His reputation preceded him everywhere. Everybody loves Russ Taff. They speak good about him behind his back. Everybody from, Charles Dorris to, John Huey, they all loved Russ, which makes it even more shocking that he's such a likable guy that was just racked with this. So did you even know who he was? Because this was post-Mo.
It was about 10 years before I was really paying attention. So I was thinking about this. So like my quote unquote hero about the like 10 years later would have been Stephen Curtis. So Stephen Curtis came onto the scene about, like, in his popularity was about 10 years, 8 to 10 years after Russ Taff.
Yeah.
So that's where I kind of attached to Stephen. Russ would have been, too early for me to really understand who he was or know who he was. I mean, I caught up later in life to know the name, but I never listened to any of his music or his records like I would have for Stephen, which, like you said, never meet your heroes. I did meet Stephen one time.
He's fantastic.
We bumped into each other at in Walmart of all places a week before Christmas.
What department?
Well, we were passing each other in an aisleway. Like he was going, we were kind of like two cars running into each other, turning a corner.
Like lawn and garden, groceries. Help me. I'm going to picture this.
It was we were both trying to find the wrapping paper aisle, and we run into each other. I never met him before.
He's not as tall as you think he's going to be.
He was so apologetic. He was so sweet, so nice, and he, for whatever reason, I don't know, I just looked at him, probably with a deer in the headlights look. Actually, I did. I was speechless. Stephen Curtis Chapman reference there. I'm so proud of myself.
That's pretty good. It's a great adventure.
But my wife, she spoke up because I couldn't get a word out. And because he was like, so sorry, ma'am. Do you know where the wrapping paper is? And, Jennifer's like, yeah, it's just right down here. So nice to meet you. My husband's a big fan. Like, I just couldn't talk.
It's what he wants to say.
I was like, but he's so sweet. We bumped into each other a few times later. But that's, living in Nashville, that stuff's going to happen.
Yeah.
But his story, Russ's story, what I love about it is that he described the true covering, right? Like he just described the hope that he found through Jesus. Like this man went through hell and back in his life, but in your last point of the teaching, like the one true the covering was Jesus.
Yeah.
And he lives that out now.
And his useless covering, one of them, not only alcohol, but fame and success.
True.
Something that you and I have both had a front row seat to is that fame does not cure that. It just magnifies it, and which makes it's just sort of an irony, because here's a guy that is literally selling out tours. I bought every record the guy made through like 91, I think. And, even the Imperial stuff, which I was too young to really appreciate, but I respected it. And I didn't even know about his previous life, like in the Southern Gospel and all that world. But when I look back now and I listen to his records and his songs, you can just feel his faith journey, especially in the light of what he's talked about. And by the way, the story of alcoholism and addiction, all that, it long outlasted that. He relapsed, and pain, all those things were happening in his life. But the thing that people think, if I can just get this, then I won't feel this anymore. And it's subconscious. For the most part, it's subconscious for all of us. Nobody wakes up in the morning, and when you're 16 or 20 and thinking, okay, I feel all this shame, so I'm going to go be famous to cover the shame. It's this drive that's inside of us. And the gospel itself, which he did not fully understand, when you hear what was, it's like he had half the gospel, and half the gospel is not the gospel. And half the gospel for him was you're worthless, you're evil, you're wicked, you're gross, that is half the gospel. The gospel, the doctrine of total depravity, which most people, they don't like that. On the other hand, the other half of the gospel is, but you are so loved, right, that God did it gladly. Hebrews 12, verse 2. And most in the progressive, and I say progressive, but you see this a lot in churches that I probably won't name names, but prosperity gospel stuff, which is God loves you so much, you're perfect just the way you are, Again, true in that God does love you so much, and God came to send his son, all those things are 100% true. God doesn't make mistakes, 100% true. But without the beginning of the gospel, you end up with this whole other thing, which is why you see this happening, I think, in progressive circles so much, which is this response to, well, if I'm perfectly good, I can do whatever the heck I want because God loves me just the way I am. And you end up with a shamelessness of it, which is not good either. So, Russ got trapped into the hardcore religious, and I have several actually friends. I had a conversation last week with one that his life's falling apart, his marriage is falling apart, and they, but if you talk to them about their theology, and they can't connect that dot that I'm living the way I wanted to live, and somehow coming to the point of, did you not think this was how this was going to end? That your wife was going to leave you if you did that? You didn't see that coming, and they didn't. But it's for me, but it's for all of us. Like the gospel itself matters so much because both are simultaneously true. So it allows me to believe the truth about myself, which I believe Chip Dodd talks about, that humility is the result of a healthy shame. And it's funny. I actually understand why he calls it that. I don't like it because there's a part of me that it doesn't quite click.
The negative connotation of the word shame.
Yeah, like it didn't quite click. Like I get the guilt, but the shame part. But here's the thing: I do see what he's saying. Like with Russ or with me or whatever, the way that things I did to my kids, like there is a shameful part of that. But if I let it, what Chip says, the healthy part of that would be then, I can now see that this is the truth about me, which is I desperately need a savior. And that I do agree with Chip on.
Should we use this time to make a correction?
We should. We probably should open with the correction. And why you didn't have my back, man? You heard me say it.
Well, I wasn't sure.
You fact check me.
I wasn't sure. I had a feeling, and then I got distracted with some other things.
In fairness, the toilets were flooding, and
we had a banner day on Sunday.
Building an ark.
My own ark. Moa's ark in the Generations wing,
and floating out with toilet paper and sewage. But
let's not talk about that. That's my own therapy. I need to work through, but. You mentioned, and I think there was a slide created up on the screen, which is not helpful.
It did say Shem and Japheth, but...
You mentioned that Jesus was through the line of Japheth.
Yep, which is incorrect.
It's through the line of Shem.
Yeah. The point still remains that it was the guy in the bloodline of Jesus that made the covering, and didn't help that I botched it, and now Mike is not going to be able to use that unless you can... Can we voice over Japheth and Shem? So I'll say Shem, but my mouth will have two syllables. What he did say. Or we just leave it as is because the internet loves to correct you. If you want to go viral, say something wrong and they will correct you for months.
So Noah's three sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth.
Yep.
And the line of Shem then leads to Abraham, yes?
Yeah.
Which then continues all the way to Christ.
Yeah. And Ham, on the other hand, led to, were the Canaanites, his son Canaan. That's why one of the reasons which I brought up in the passage was that here's Moses writing at the end of his life to Joshua and the people of Israel going, okay, and by the way, this is where the Canaanites came from, which was a shameful culture.
Yeah, I wanted you to talk about that actually.
Yeah.
The son that was cursed over history, what did that look like?
Yeah, it looked like the Canaanites. So when you go into the Old Testament, Kings, Chronicles, all those, and you see the Canaanites, you're going into the land of Canaan, taken back. That is the lineage of Ham. And you will see, this is a side note, many of the Bible-thumping, hardcore slave owners pointed to this passage. They called it the curse of Ham, and justified slavery, that there are those that are meant to be slaves, and these are the ones because we've enslaved them, in the curse of Ham. Important to remember that it's not the curse of Ham. It was the curse of Canaan, and that there are no Canaanites. They were wiped out. So it was a ham sham. Someone write that down. I'm feeling pretty good about that. Ooh, yeah.
Are you serious?
A ham sham, but
not a Ham Shem. Yeah. That's his brother.
But which is why theology is so doggone important, and why, as Dr. Michael Easley says, do not let the world teach you theology, because the world was enslaving people, and so they go to the Bible and find, okay, well, that's why we can justify it now with this, because they're supposed to be slaves. God said they were going to be slaves.
I have come across that with those that are very racist. Will use that.
Yeah, still
today, to say that that's part of their curse.
Yeah.
That's why.
Yeah, they're part of the generation of Ham, and it's just nonsense. genetically, DNA-wise, all that is just nonsense. Biblically, it's nonsense. I think I've told you this. I'm a little nervous about the place that I'm moving into. My wife and I are moving into a cabin built in 1794 and all that, but it's a mile from the home of Nathan Bedford Forrest, his childhood home. So I'm actually going to have all our prayer warriors come over there and just cast all the demons out of racism or whatever going on down there. But, you know, even in our own history of our own state, you know, Pulaski, Tennessee, the racism that came out of that, the KKK, using the Bible. And by the way, the same way that Hitler used the Bible, this is not new, what Hitler did. This has been used since the Garden of Eden. Did God really say, you know, with Jesus, you know, Satan was quoting scripture to Jesus. Like this, using the Bible to justify evil is not new. It's one of the oldest tricks in the book. And it continues to be used to justify that. And it's, if you hear that, know that there are no Canaanites. It's a ludicrous idea.
They were wiped out.
They were wiped out. There are no Canaanites, which is why when you even hear about the land of Israel and all that, like we need to return it to its original, you know, inhabitants. Well, they're called the Canaanites, and they're not here anymore, so they can't turn it over to the Canaanites.
Yeah, which brings up another little topic of, why did God instruct, certain people groups to be wiped out or destroyed back in the day?
You want to go there.
Right. It's like, well, here's an example, right? Like the Canaanites, they were cursed people and causing all kinds of trouble and strife and dissension.
Yeah.
And it needed to be removed.
Yeah, when you think of it from, first of all, you have to ask yourself the question, if God created the universe, right? God spoke and it was. Is it possible that God might know something that I don't know, right? Is it possible that God might understand something that I don't understand, and that which is where faith comes in? I have to trust him. And I can do some mental gymnastics and can talk through and can see even like what we talk about with the flood, the Nephilim, or whatever, like if it was about humanity, like if he didn't stop it there would not be us. Just simple fact. The narrative of Genesis. If you don't believe it, that's a whole other conversation. But at least if you're going to reject the Bible, reject what the Bible actually says, not what you think it said, which is that not that God just wiped out the human race. There was evil. There was nothing but evil, nothing but violence, every thought and every inclination. And then you mix in the DNA of the sons of God. So that's what God did. And when it comes to the Canaanites, by the way, that you'll see references to the Nephilim again inside of a couple times in the New. In fact, David, if I remember right, killed the last of the Nephilim, but which meant that some stuff continued on in some way or another. But inside of the Canaanites, he also gave them time to repent, gave them time to, and eventually, if you are trying to protect God's people, which is, by the way, trying to protect the bloodline of Christ. It's not just protecting Israel. It was protecting Israel, but the Savior for us was coming through that bloodline. And the Canaanites, and by the way, the Edomites, all of them, they were bent on a demonically fueled destruction of Israel, because demonically fueled by Satan, because it meant that he could, whoever this Messiah was going to be, that he could destroy him, and God would break his promises. So if you just look at the physical realm, it's very confusing. But if you add the spiritual, the unseen realm inside of that realm, it makes a whole lot more sense.
Yeah. You mentioned Pulaski a second ago, and I want to believe that Pulaski down in deep South Tennessee has redeemed themselves because of the invention and the manufacturing of Sundrop.
Wait, that's where Sundrop came from?
Yes,
so Sundrop is a racist drink?
Oh, come on.
I didn't know that.
Unbelievable. No, they redeemed it. They redeemed the town.
I didn't know that's where Sundrop came from.
Yes, and I've been meaning to take a little field trip down there.
That would be called a pilgrimage, not a field trip. For you. For me, it's a field trip. For you, it's a pilgrimage.
Oh, man, come back with some swag and some drinks on a hot summer day.
You have taught me something I did not know.
Gosh,
so Pulaski gave us Sundrop and racism.
Well, again.
And by the way, Pulaski is not that anymore. Every town, every country, every name, whatever, there's pockets of people
come and go.
They believe nutty stuff. But, we do not get punished. If you're in North Korea, you get punished for the sins of your grandparents. But we're not North Korea.
Yeah. As we wrap up here, any predictions for what we're going to see in the next couple of weeks with I'm circling back with our presidential situation here?
My prediction continues to be that he is going to step down at the convention.
Okay, which I believe is the first week of August.
Yeah.
So that's like a month. It's a month away.
Yeah.
We're a month away, 5 weeks away, I think.
Yeah, I have no way to know this. I think he was going to do that anyway.
We had actually said this, and it's in a previous podcast, and it would be really hard to find. But I'm sure somebody who's looking for something to do could dig it up. But a few months ago, we had talked about this potential possibility happening.
Yeah.
Around the convention time, the DNC time.
Yeah. And for me, it was I could never have predicted. I was shocked that they agreed to do the debate. And
yes.
And candidly, now that I think back on it, of course, we all are Monday morning quarterbacking, whatever, but I've wondered if they were bluffing that they thought, because they thought Trump would not accept, because the restrictions they put on him from doing it on CNN, number one, CNN completely controlling the feed. Everybody around the country, all these other stations, they all had to go from CNN's feed with it to the microphone. They literally hamstrung Trump. I think they probably thought, or could have been, that he wasn't going to take the bait, that he would say, I'm not going to debate under these circumstances. But when he said yes, now they're like, oh, geez.
Yeah, that's one possibility for sure. I think another possibility is that the powers that be wanted to parade Biden out there for this exact result.
Yeah. That could very well be, because the powers that be are not Hunter Biden or Jill Biden. There are.
Yeah, they put him out in the public stage for him to embarrass everyone.
And one thing, and the Republican Party is the same, but the Democrats especially, but they're ruthless behind the scenes. And you ask Bernie Sanders, ask Robert F. Kennedy, because, by the way, a very viable candidate that could have been the Democratic candidate and honestly would have won if they'd have chosen Kennedy. They were savage with that. So it's very plausible that they did, whoever they are.
Right.
But I definitely was shocked that Biden even offered to do it. Like, this guy has done fewer interviews than any president in history. Every public thing he does is totally controlled. And by the way, under all that control, still blatantly obvious that he was struggling with his mental acuity. Still blatantly. I think the next day the Wall Street Journal was quoting multiple different European leaders that were like, well, this is not a surprise. We watched him. We knew that everybody knew this. But it was so controlled that I thought there's no way they're going to do this. Yeah. And the irony of all ironies is that the way they set up the debate actually helped Trump. Like, if you go back to the 2020 debate, I remember being so frustrated with Trump. Just let him talk; he'll hang himself. Yeah. But he wouldn't let him finish, which is what happens with anybody who's in. It's like that Michael Scott. Sometimes I just start a sentence and I hope I'm going to find the end of it somewhere along the way, or however that quote is. But Trump never let him get to that. He would interrupt him with it, and so he actually helped Biden in that situation.
This time, yeah.
But this one,
measured.
Yeah, this one, he's So I know, obviously, I'm sure he was coached. By somebody, but I'll give him credit on this. There was a moment where I'm thinking he should be bludgeoning him right now with this, but he just let him speak, and then people saw what they saw, and so my prediction is that this was already that he was going to anyway, but they can't say it for the reasons I've already stated, which is they can't go out there right now and say he is not fit to be a candidate, because he would then not be fit for office. But if he stands at the convention and says, So
Kamala's on deck?
For the good, well, then it doesn't have to be Kamala.
It can be anybody that they choose.
So it has to be in the sense that they've pigeonholed themselves, but doesn't have to be in the sense that the law does not say that at all.
There's not very many options.
Yeah. What's your prediction on this?
Oh, man, I don't know. It's either going to be Kalama or
Coloma?
Kalama.
A colomoscopy? A colomoscopy? We're going to give our nation a colomoscopy.
Oh, that's also not too far from
Yeah, that's
truth.
a mental picture.
Or Gavin.
Should not have given.
Gavin, I don't know. I just don't have great options. I don't know. It's going to be somebody.
You know who they could win with is Michael Bloomberg.
Nobody's talking about him.
I know, but they could win with that guy.
I mean,
He's tough on crime. He cleaned up New York City.
Yeah.
Raging Democrat. He's rich as can be. He could win, but they won't do that because he's not a puppet for them. But
I don't know. It's baffling. It's fluid. It changes every 10 times a day. It's just we're in unprecedented waters, that's for sure. And so hold on to your seats.
Yeah. This is. I mean, I'm super bummed. Well, I'll be back in time, I guess. But I'm going to be gone for like a month in September, hiking in Everest and stuff. But I'm like, man, of all the months, my little political junkie,
Going to be so removed.
21-year-old New York's time reading, like this is what the moment I've been waiting for my whole life. Like history being made, and I'm going to be,
The side of
carrying my
in the
fat
fall.
butt up a mountain. But I'll be back in time for the action.
What does Sunday look like? Are we in Genesis 10? No, we're not.
We're not. I'm not. We got
We're not.
Youth guy going here, man.
Joel Kelly, our youth pastor, is going to be leading and speaking, sharing everything that's happening with our Reverb Youth Ministries, which is a lot of things, amazing things are happening. There's going to be baptisms and testimonies, and they're coming back from a really powerful time at camp. So that is actually this Sunday.
And might I add, okay, you heard that now. You're like, okay, this is my Sunday to skip. Fair enough, whatever. Joel is an amazing communicator.
Does a fantastic job.
And is a theologian. Like our youth group, our kids are so blessed. I mean, I don't know. I'm sure there are other youth pastors doing this, but studying systematic theology every Friday for 3 hours, like that's what our next gen wing does. And it's fair to say, like our youth group that just went to camp, 200 kids, that's bigger than our church was when we moved into this building.
It's weird to think
like
about.
He's leading a generation of young people that are selling themselves out to Jesus. So if you want hope for the future, get your butt to church on Sunday because you're going to get a front row seat to the hope of our future, which is these students led by Joel and Michaela.
That's awesome. Very true. Thanks for joining us on this week's Deeper Podcast. Have a great 4th of July weekend, hopefully with some friends and family. Be safe out there. And if you're watching for the first time, feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you're listening, thank you for listening online. And we look forward to being here next week as we continue the Deeper Podcast.